Namaskar. Today, in this My Bharat campaign, we again assemble here virtually, this time to hear Shri Sai Deepak sir on the topic Understanding Our Constitution and Governance. Disha Bharat, as we have known till now, works with various stakeholders of the education sector. When the pandemic struck, education in the traditional sense was halted. This situation gave us a chance to innovate and design more content and programs for online delivery. Online workshops for college students are designed and delivered to over 11,000 students under the name Unleash the Hidden Potential in You. Innovative methodologies are used to sensitize the students on how to respond to challenges, ways to keep focus when going gets tough, and tips to succeed. Important skills like time management, stress management, and leadership, etc., are also taught to students in online mode. The feedback received by students is overwhelming. They all have successfully adopted to the new normal. In the last 18 months, days of national significance like Republic Day talk on Constitution, Bharatada Jnanadhare, Parakrama Divas, Savarkar Jayanti, tributes to Sardar Patel and Savarkar by students have been conducted. Kannada Rajyotsava, National Science Day celebrations were also done by students through Facebook Live programs. To introduce the speaker today, we have with us Srimati Srilata Ramprasad, a chartered accountant, counselor, and a volunteer with Disha Bharat. Srilata madam, over to you.
Thank you, Kshama. Namaste. On behalf of Disha Bharat, I have much pleasure in introducing today's speaker, Shri J. Sai Deepak, to the August gathering this evening. Shri Sai Deepak is an engineer and lawyer practicing as an arguing counsel at Anna University. He graduated with the bachelor's degree in law and has carved a niche for him judgments. To name a few: Shabrimala Ayyappa Temple, Sri Padmanabha Swami Temple, and Basmati geographical indicators. In 2009, he was awarded the Young Alumni Achievers Award by his alma mater, IIT Kanpur. Apart from delivering lectures on law, he is a prolific writer on constitutional issues for leading newspapers and magazines. Without much ado, I request Shri Sai Deepak to take over. Thank you, sir.
Namaste. Thank you to Disha Bharat for giving me an opportunity to interact with the students across the country, and to the organizers for giving me an opportunity to share whatever little I know on the Constitution. But before I start with the topic, I must congratulate all the listeners for this wonderful victory of Neeraj Chopra at the Olympics, where he's won the athletic gold for the very first time for Bharat, and I've been constantly watching it. So I was hoping that the two events wouldn't clash, and thankfully they did not clash. And I think it's a great moment for the country. And through this platform, I'd also like to convey my congratulations to this brilliant athlete that Bharat has produced. And hopefully he would win, or he would be awarded the first Major Dhyan Chand Khel Ratna Award. So let's see what happens. So congratulations to everyone. I think this is a great moment for the country. So coming back to the topic. So I think it's capable of being a very technical topic. I can convert this into an extremely legal topic, but I don't think that is the point, and I don't think it would do justice to the theme or the very intention behind having this discussion. So let me try and keep my points as broad and as general as possible, so that students and listeners and others have an opportunity to use these points as, let's say, the starting points of their own inquiry with respect to the nature of Bharat's constitution and what we think we know about it and what it truly says or what it actually says and what are its origins in history. Uh, in this regard, I have been speaking on this subject for close to 5 years now, since September 2016, and I have written articles in various newspapers as well as in my own column called the Indic Views as part of the Daily Guardian. So I've written about 42 to 43 pieces. And last October, I started writing a book to capture my thoughts in a much more coherent fashion and to understand the constitution in the broader perspective of Bharat's tryst with European colonization, and also whether there is truly any distance between the Indian constitution and Bharatiya spirit, because on a daily basis, we hear this discussion either on social media or in our normal conversations that the Indian constitution seems to be at loggerheads with Indic ethos, and that perhaps it is much more, or rather, it's much closer to, let's say, the European spirit than to the Bharatiya spirit. That seems to be the discussion that I've heard over and over again as part of several conversations. So to understand this particular issue myself and to understand it from a very rigorous perspective, I decided to start writing a book on the subject after having done a fair bit of reading. So that book started on, I think, on the 12th of October 2020 last year. And I completed the book on Sri Ram Navami this year on 21st of April. And the pre-order link was released on the 7th of July. And I'm happy to inform the viewers and the listeners that currently it is perhaps in the bestseller category, in the political categories on Amazon. And from what I understand from the publisher, the initial stocks which were kept for pre-order release ran out within 40 minutes of the release of the pre-order link. That shows that there's a significant degree of interest in understanding the Constitution better, going beyond the usual metes and bounds of the discussion. So I hope that once the book is launched, which is on the eve of Independence Day, over the course of the next week, it will be launched formally. I hope your listeners buy that book so that they understand the Constitution from a, let's say, a larger perspective and don't limit it purely to a legal understanding. So that's what I've tried to do in the book. Whenever we try and discuss the Constitution, there seems to be an assumption that it is a document that primarily deals with aspects relating to administration and governance. That, I think, would be limiting the scope of the document itself, because the Constitution of any country, or at least most countries, is primarily a document that captures the statement of identity of that particular country as to what does it see itself as and what does it wish to see itself as. So it is both a statement of the present as well as a statement of the future. It's a vision statement and a mission statement, and also a statement of what it is when the Constitution is being put together. So therefore, there is a significant, let's say, aspect of identity-related issues that the Constitution covers. And this is more or less that aspect of the Constitution which is constantly in controversy or in some kind of debate or discussion throughout the year. There is never a point in our lives when the Constitution is not the subject of any debate, whether it is on the subject of language or on the subject of caste or on the subject of treatment of minorities, on the subject of treatment of religious institutions, the rights of educational institutions of communities, so on and so forth. There is practically no aspect of our daily discussions, whether it is political, social, or cultural, which is independent of the Constitution. Which is why I think there is a greater need for dissemination of knowledge about this particular document and its nature and character. I understand that sometimes this particular document may seem daunting because of its length and the sheer volume and the legal language, the hardcore legal language that it is let's say drafted in. But nevertheless, I think an attempt must be made to try and simplify this particular document and disseminate, let's say, the knowledge of its provisions to a lot of people, because we seem to be relying on WhatsApp University and social media primarily to understand the document without actually reading the document itself. So my endeavor of the last 5 years has been to contribute to greater dissemination of knowledge with respect to the Constitution, its origins, its history, its positives as well as its negatives, so that people don't deify this document. As much as I think it is important for people to know about this document and its contents, it is equally important to not treat the document as some kind of let's say, a God-given scripture. And when you elevate a man-made document to that particular status, I think you effectively commit the mistake of casting it in stone, because then you tie down future generations from taking a decision that they wish to meet their own situations and exigencies. So, which is why, while I insist on greater knowledge of the Constitution, I equally insist on treating this as a practical document as opposed to a religious document. So when someone says that I swear by the Constitution, it is a constitutional requirement to take an oath on the Constitution when you take public office. But otherwise, I don't think it must be treated with the kind of religiosity that most people these days do, because then it effectively turns a blind eye, or that approach turns a blind eye to the larger aspect of the Constitution, which is to say, a document in itself is not an end; it is the means to an end. So, what is the goal that it is actually pushing us towards? What is the objective or the destination towards which we are supposed to move? If the Constitution is to be treated only as a path and not the destination itself. In my limited opinion, and I've said this as much in several places, and that's more or less the subject of my book, that the Constitution must be seen as a means of protecting civilizational integrity, civilizational interests, and civilizational consciousness or identity. That, according to me, is the purpose of any document that ties any society together. If that particular aspect is missing and it is merely seen as a rudimentary document for the purposes of administration or governance, then perhaps we are missing the forest for the trees. Because unless and until there is clarity in a society as to what its identity is and what its roots are, no amount of political efficiency or administrative efficiency will improve its position on the, let's say, on the global stage. If you respect, let's say, the Chinese or the Americans or the Japanese, it's not just because of their developed nature or, let's say, their advanced nature with respect to social matrices or, let's say, their development indices, so to speak. You do so also because they bring their own distinct cultural stamp to every value that they believe in. So there is a Chinese model of development. There has to be a Japanese model of development. There is an American model of development. Administrative measures differ simply because cultural attitudes are different. And if cultural attitudes are different, then policy-making procedures as well as the policies themselves are bound to be different, because you have to tailor your policies in accordance with the nature of the people. Now, when it comes to Bharat, the problem that we typically face, or at least if not the word problem, I'd at least use the word challenge that we typically face, is that Bharat has never been, is not, and shall never be a monolith, in the sense that it is an ocean of multiple identities, and it is an ocean of multiple cultures which have chosen to remain together because there is a unity that ties them together in the form of some kind of dharmic unity or a civilizational unity. However, there is a very strong expression of diverse and individual tendencies also. So the attitudes in the Northeast may be different, and the attitudes within the Northeast may be different, because while we sometimes mistakenly club the Northeast as one region, it actually has multiple tribes, multiple cultures, and multiple groups with their own identities and ways of life. Similarly, this can be said of every part of Bharat and every direction of Bharat. If Bharat were to be divided into 8 time zones, so to speak. So when we decide to craft policies, the question that I would ask myself as, let's say, a practitioner of constitutional law as well as a student of Indic civilizational studies, is whether the Indian constitution is sensitive to the diversity of Bharat and does it have enough room to tailor, let's say, its policies to suit the cultural palette of different parts of the country? So, for instance, caste identities, while there may be some broad basis across the country, the manner in which it functions in different parts of the country may be different. The power dynamics may be different. The equation, the societal, the social cultural dynamics may be different. These are aspects which must be considered when you come out with policies, either with respect to language or with respect to reservations or with respect to defining which are castes or groups which are socially backward, or let's say developmentally backward or culturally backward in terms of not being able to express their culture or bringing it to the mainstream. Therefore, that is the first question that I would ask myself when I look at the Indian Constitution. It's not enough to simply celebrate unity in diversity by paying lip service to it. If unity in diversity is a motto that Bharat believes in, then diversity is as much a part of that particular motto as is unity. Therefore, does the Constitution respect and advance those diversities without killing or without jeopardizing the underlying unity? Is the larger question that I've been trying to address. Second, Bharat as an independent republic, as we know today, is the product of decolonization or the independence movement, which resulted in, let's say, the independence of 15th of August 1947. But that has only created the current entity as we know it. It's not as if Bharat as a civilization was born on that particular date. It has a long history, and therefore the republic is the successor state or the inheritor of the civilization that we know as the Bharatiya civilization or the Indic civilization. So does the Constitution recognize this particular journey? Does the Constitution understand the relationship between Bharat as a civilization and Bharat as a contemporary nation state or a civilization state? So these are aspects that I think require a lot more thinking, because the Constitution is not meant to be, let's say, a homogenizing tool which chooses to paint every group and every section and every segment of the society with the same brush. Each of these groups have had their own histories and they have their own ways of life that they wish to protect. So in my limited reading so far, I believe that the Constitution does a fair job of protecting those identities. Unfortunately, what has happened over the years, especially after 1952, which is when we had our first general elections, when Mr. Jawaharlal Nehru was elected the first prime minister, the policies post 1950 have been interpreted as the gospel truth from a constitutional perspective. The point I'm trying to make is the Constitution as a document as it existed on the 26th of January 1950 has been to a significant extent interpreted in a manner which is at variance with what the framers actually thought of when they put together this document. And it has been pushed in a certain direction to suit certain ideological positions of the governments which ruled this government in its formative years, especially from 1952 to 1977. And I'm specifically referring to the period of Sri Jawaharlal Nehru and Srimati Indira Gandhi. Although Lal Bahadur Shastri was a part of this particular period, I see him as being a slightly different person, and his own policies were much more closer to the Bharatiya spirit than, let's say, the Nehruvian administration's policy towards Bharat or Ms. Gandhi's administration or policy towards Bharat. Because both of them brought to bear a certain degree of anglicized tendencies to looking at Bharat, to governing Bharat and understanding its society. I don't think that they did justice to the intention of the framers of the Constitution, because while the Constitution was framed at a time when the colonial powers were still fairly powerful despite decolonization, the framers of the Constitution managed to retain a significant degree of Bharatiyata, which is why you have provisions that deal with protection of cows from slaughter as part of the Indian Constitution, which clearly shows that there are certain civilizational ethos that the framers of the Constitution were extremely aware of. And all those aspirations and all those aspects were incorporated in the Constitution. However, post 1950, the manner in which the Constitution has been interpreted and the manner in which the Constitution has been presented to the public seems to be completely at loggerheads with the native spirit, which is why perhaps today, as a consequence of this particular treatment of the constitution by successive governments, most people believe that there is nothing Indian about the constitution itself. They believe that it is a foreign import. Of course, a significant amount of it and a significant degree of it is a foreign import, because the basic structure of the constitution, its administrative mechanisms, are the product of the European establishment. So the bulk of the constitution as we know it today, you can find it as a replication or a mirror image of the structure that existed under the Government of India Act of 1919, as well as the Government of India Act of 1935, because the division of subjects between the state and the center, the concept of a central legislature by way of a parliament and the state legislature by way of a state assembly, all these aspects are not Indian, and they are not the product, the unique product of either Dr. Ambedkar or the Constituent Assembly. These were aspects that were introduced as part of the first constitution for Bharat, which is the Government of India Act of 1919, which even Dr. Ambedkar referred to as the first British-made constitution for India. So a significant amount of our provisions, our structure, all of it comes from what the white man left in this country. So maybe, perhaps, this is a good time for us to reconsider whether we wish to go ahead with the very same structure that the white man left behind, or if we believe that there is no problem with the structure, is there a problem with the identity of the constitution, which is that today it is seen as a document that is completely antithetical to Bharat's civilizational ethos. Nobody believes, at least 90% of the people, if you talk to them, they will tell you that whether they know anything about the constitution or not, they don't trust Indian courts or Indian constitutional courts to do justice to Indic practices, Indic faith systems, or Indic institutions. Because we believe, rightly or wrongly, that people occupying constitutional positions are completely cut off from the realities of Bharat, from the ground realities of Bharat, because they continue to look at Bharat through the Western lens, through the eyes of the white man. And therefore, whenever they look at Bharat, they think of it as a project which requires constant reform, whether from a political perspective or from a societal perspective or a cultural perspective. Most people who occupy these positions don't believe that there is anything in Bharat's past which is worthy of being taken forward or which is worthy of being applied to our current challenges and circumstances. This is effectively the dichotomy that I'm trying to address, because a developed country cannot hope to be fully developed, or it cannot even aspire to be a developed country, as long as it has substituted its own original thinking with an imported thought process which has come from the outside. Any success, any degree of success which is achieved through unoriginal thinking and where you've completely imported everything from the outside is always going to be temporary and ephemeral. It's not going to last for very long, simply because whatever you have chosen to implement in this country has not originated from this country, does not resonate with its native spirit. So indigenization of anything that is imported is important. At the same time, you should try and evolve policies and principles which draw from your own history. So for instance, if you ask any average student of the law or even school-going students today who are exposed to the constitution through subjects like civics, if they believe that democracy is a Bharatiya principle or a Bharatiya concept, or whether free speech is a Bharatiya concept, or whether individual liberty is a Bharatiya concept, most of them will tell you that no, everything has been imported from the outside, which clearly shows that they have not been exposed to the democratic traditions of this land. They have not been exposed to the republican nature of institutions that we have set up several years before Europe understood the concept of a republican institution, several decades or centuries before Europe ever awoke from its dark ages. So these are aspects that I think must be included as part of our constitutional discourse in this country and education about the constitution, because unless and until we do that, future generations will always grow up under the belief that every institution in this country, including the concept of rule of law, the concept of democracy, the concept of individual liberty, the concept of free speech, everything that they value has nothing Bharatiya in it. Nothing would be more dangerous than that. because that seriously undermines the self-respect at a very individual level, at a very personal level, and also at a collective level in the societal level. We never fail to underestimate the impact that such notions have on children, especially when they grow up. So a couple of years ago, I happened to be at a gathering of journalists. This was perhaps in 2010, 2011. These were all elite journalists from the National Capital Region, and it also had a fair bunch of graduates from leading institutions and elite institutions such as IIM Ahmedabad and other places, people who were entrepreneurs and startup owners and founders and whatnot. So during the course of the conversation over dinner, suddenly the conversation started about how Bharat is better at development compared to Pakistan and other, let's say, neighboring countries, which may have its own reasons. But one of the participants in the discussion ended up saying that no, Bharat has this advantage because of the white man's investment in this country by way of telegraph, post and telegraph, railway lines, and whatnot. And whatever our achievements are today has been credited to the British man to the extent of saying, had the white man not made these investments in this country, Bharat would have continued to be an underdeveloped nation at par with perhaps an African nation, was the statement that was made. I was actually taken aback. So, in fact, the next statement that was made is, Bharat would have never known the concept of a constitution or, let's say, a democratic form of government had it not been for the white man. This is the extent to which educated Indians, graduates and products of elite institutions such as IIM Ahmedabad and other places, this is the notion that they have about Bharat and its history. In other words, according to them, there is nothing about Bharat's past which has anything to do with democracy, individual liberties, free speech, nothing at all. And therefore, we are to be treated as a bunch of savages who have been civilized by the white man through the medium of the constitution, which is constantly civilizing us and which is constantly reforming us. If that is the attitude that people carry with respect to Bharat, there is no possibility of Bharat ever aspiring to becoming even a cultural superpower, let alone a military superpower, simply because it is buried under layers of inferiority complex, or what experts call coloniality or colonial consciousness, which means the white man may have left, the colonizer may have left, but we continue to think like slaves at the mental level. And for every problem, we look at a European solution or a Eurocentric solution or a British solution. So for instance, in courts, as a practitioner, I can tell you this for a fact. If there is a situation with respect to which there is no legal answer, or there is no judgment, or there is no legislation that deals with it, and you're trying to understand what is the best way of dealing with that particular situation, invariably, 9 out of 10 times, Indian courts and Indian policymakers have one standard approach. Ask yourself, what has America done? Ask yourself what United Kingdom has done. Ask yourself what Europe has done. Ask yourself what even New Zealand or Australia has done. They will never ask, what did our ancestors do when faced with such a problem, if at all there was such a problem in the first place? Is there any way that the principle of the past can be extrapolated? Is there any way that our own thought processes can be applied to the problems of the present and the challenges of the present? That never seems to be the approach. When it comes to development, we look at the white man. When it comes to environmental preservation, we look at the white man. Imagine Bharat, when the white man entered this place, was effectively a land of jungles, a land of waterfalls, absolutely dense, and it was blessed with nature. Could nature have been preserved for thousands of years despite the population of Bharat? Because Bharat and China have always been heavily populated regions because of their fertility and their ability to feed a lot of people. This happens to be one of the most constantly densely populated parts of the world in its entire history. Therefore, could we have preserved all these forests and the environment despite our population if we did not understand the concept of environmental protection or the importance of nature in our lives? If you look at our philosophy or let's say our faith systems, we deify and we worship nature. So Varuna is water, then you're looking at Agni, then you're looking at Indra. So you're effectively giving each of these natural elements the status of celestial beings. If that is not representative of your respect for nature, then what is? So, which is why the problem with modern constitutionalism, or the way Bharat, let's say, looks at this particular document is, it is effectively seen as a document which is the gift of the West to Bharat. And had it not been for this gift, apparently we would have completely, let's say, landed in chaos, and Bharat would have completely been fragmented, and we would have been balkanized. That seems to be the notion. As a society and as a civilization, we have existed as one civilizational unit for several millennia, for several thousands of years, even before the concept of a constitution ever took birth, or let's say was conceived of in Europe or in the West. So whenever you have a discussion on the constitution, my standard approach has been, and I'm offering this as a suggestion to the listeners, and I leave it entirely to your discretion, has been to understand Bharat's history, to understand Bharat's own circumstances, its own policy towards policy making, or its own approach to policy making, and then apply it to the concept of a constitution. If you start with the notion that I must look to the West for every problem that Bharat faces, then in the process, what you're doing is to remold Bharat in the image of the West and stripping it of its entire originality. So while I could have discussed several aspects of the Constitution, I could have thrown about a couple of provisions, article this and article that. I don't think that discussion makes sense. Therefore, my attempt in most of my discussions has been to address the issue with respect to our approach to the concept of a constitution, our understanding of constitutional morality, and our understanding of this document. It is never a purely legal document. It is a socio-politico-legal document, because the origins of the constitution lie in the society, which then reflects at the level of politics and then takes shape in the form of a legal document. So its crystallization as a legal document is the last step, not the starting point, not the initial point, not the point of inquiry, not the point of embarkation. It's the last mile. The first mile is the society. Therefore, it is important for the society to have clarity with respect to two aspects of its life, or let's say of the course of its history. One, it has to be absolutely clear about its roots and its origins, and it must also have a certain degree of clarity as to where it wants to go. The amalgamation of a society's knowledge of its past and its vision for the future is what must be captured in a constitution, because that is what the document is meant to do. So therefore, I think it's important for people to understand the concept of a constitution from a historical perspective first, before they look at it from a legal perspective. So even if you happen to be a student of the law, your reading of the constitution and your understanding of this document is bound to be incomplete if it is not informed by your knowledge of history, if it is not informed by your knowledge of Bharat's socio-political cultural dynamics and what it has been subjected to for the last 1200 years at the very least. You're looking at a period that started from the 7th century AD, when the first wave of Islamic invasions began, and followed by, let's say, the advent of the Portuguese, and then the French, the Germans, the British, so on and so forth. Because most of us typically look at the colonial period as having been dominated primarily by the British. It's not just the British. Bharat was the battleground for Germans, for Belgians, for French, for the Portuguese, Spaniards. Everybody was fighting for Bharat. Now, why was everybody fighting for Bharat? If Bharat was always a backward country and a poor country and was constantly begging everybody for money, why would everybody be fighting for Bharat? Bharat was the land of riches. Bharat was the land of technology. Bharat was the land of knowledge. Bharat was the land of architecture, of science, of culture, of philosophy. It was seen as the foremost, let's say, societies to produce everything in terms of human knowledge, from the arts to the sciences to culture to spices to food and whatnot. That is why Bharat was effectively the battleground for the European colonizers. When Christopher Columbus effectively started in 1492, he did not want to go to America. He was interested in actually coming to Bharat first, and then he went to America. And whatever place he met in, or rather he encountered on the way, he kept calling it East Indies, West Indies, this and that, because he never managed to reach India. Instead, Vasco da Gama comes to this place and he's completely in awe of this place, right? So when you think of, let's say, Bharat, it would be a grave injustice to the society if you think that its origins are only from the 15th of August 1947. Bharat, at the very least, is a society which is 7,000 to 8,000 years old, with its culture among the oldest in human history. And at least until, let's say, the 1600s and 1700s, despite Islamic invasions, Bharat retained its position as one of the world's foremost cultural and economic powerhouses, and including a military powerhouse. There is no other reason why so many travelers had to come to this country, had to constantly write about this country, because it attracted the best of minds, and it also attracted the most curious of minds, saying, what is it about this land where, despite its diversity, it's not as if people are constantly fighting and killing each other? You have to do only one activity or one exercise, according to me, if you have to understand Bharat as a society and its unity. Look at how Europe has constantly fought within itself, to the extent that it has had two major world wars, where people kill each other over language, ethnicity, and whatnot. Whereas as far as Bharat is concerned, at least until the Islamic invasions, it has remained a single unit where there may be political fights with respect to territory, but by and large, there have never been identity-related problems as far as Bharat is concerned, because there is a latent unity and innate unity that all of us have been constantly aware of. So I'm not sure of the age group I'm dealing with here, but there are several books which you can read in this regard. In my upcoming book, which is called India That Is Bharat, Coloniality, Civilization, Constitution, which is published by Bloomsbury, I have tried to capture as many sources as possible so that young readers and young students can read those books and form their own opinions. Because frankly speaking, our school textbooks have never done justice to the greatness of Bharat's history, either in the Department of Civics or in the Department of Social Sciences. I think our textbooks are nowhere comparable to the actual history of this land. They don't do any justice whatsoever. So I've tried to list all those sources so that young students, at least from the age group of 18, can start reading those books and equip themselves with a better understanding of the society before they can start commenting on the Constitution. Because ultimately, as I said, the Constitution is an instrumentality of implementing a vision. And your vision of the future is always, or at least invariably, informed to a significant extent by your understanding of your past. If you have no respect for your past, if you have no understanding of your past, how do you hope to move forward with self-confidence? Because then you'll effectively say, I seem to come from a society of idiots, a defeated society of idiots, and therefore there is nothing of value that I can ever draw from the past. So let me import everything from outside. Therefore, Bharat will effectively become, let's say, a country led by mental slaves, even after independence in 1947. So I have tried to uncover these aspects as part of the book, and I have tried to address as many questions that I've encountered over the last 5 years in the Q&A sessions. But I've given it a very, let's say, coherent and systematic framework so that I cover the entire period starting from Christopher Columbus's expedition of 1492 to the first British-made constitution for Bharat, which is 1919. I've covered this entire period. So this is effectively the first book of the Bharat trilogy. The second book will cover the period from 1920 to 1951. And the third book will cover the period from 1952 and at least until 1977, perhaps beyond that. So through the course of these books, while I don't claim to analyze the Constitution in the most comprehensive of fashions, I'm certainly asking this basic question, whether the Constitution is a foreign document or an import of a foreign thought, or is there anything Indian about it? These are questions that I'm trying to address. I'm not sure if I've made up my mind yet, because I'm still in the process of writing the second book. So once the second book is complete, I'll perhaps have a better position and a better opinion on it. So with this as the preliminary discussion, I'd like to open the floor for questions, because I think it's important to understand what is it that our listeners have understood, and I'll respond to questions.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. It was indeed a very insightful lecture that you have given us, and there's a lot of food for thought, I must say. We do have certain questions here, but one specific question by one of our volunteers has intrigued me, which I'm going to ask you.
Please, ma'am.
She says, you wrote a book, India that is Bharat.
Right.
As a student of Indic studies, I feel, should that not have been Bharat that became India? What is your view on this?
So I think this question has been asked of me on social media fairly often. And let me explain the reason for having chosen this particular title. So I've mentioned this in a couple of other interviews as well. So when the CA was enacted and there were riots in several parts of the country, which were motivated by several people, in one of my tweets on Twitter, I referred to India as Bharat. I called it Bharat. And an Indian student who's pursuing his master's in America, I don't mind naming the student, his name is Tarun Chinmay, effectively said that calling India as Bharat was bigoted. And he said that this is nothing but saffron agenda and whatnot. He said you shouldn't use the word Bharat for India. So I reproduced the language of Article 1 of the Constitution in response to his tweet, because Article 1 of the Constitution says, India, that is Bharat, shall be a union of states. Now, what that tells me and what it told me then was the utter lack of knowledge of what the Constitution says, because these are people who think of themselves as constitutional patriots and who did not even know that the Constitution, the very first article, talks of India as Bharat. Okay. So the idea was to somehow drive this in the minds of this generation by lifting the language of Article 1 and making it the title of the book. That was the reason behind it. Now, the second thing is, why did the article use India, that is Bharat? I have discussed that history as part of the book. Okay. And that will answer the question which is being posed by your listener as to whether it should have been Bharat, that is India, or should it have been only Bharat? Why should there be an India? Okay. And whether Dr. Ambedkar wanted Bharat, did not want Bharat, wanted India, did not want India, I have addressed this using the Constituent Assembly debates. Because a lot of people have a lot of, let's say, myths about who drafted the Constitution, who said what and all that. I have addressed all of that. In fact, if I may say so, Dr. Ambedkar displayed let's say, a significant degree of reluctance to the use of the word Bharat for India. Okay. In fact, his first draft, which he presented to the Constituent Assembly, only had India. Only after other members of the Constituent Assembly pushed him and said, either include Bharatavarsha or Bharat or something that reflects our identity, he decided to then include Bharat. Even then, he did not want to let go of India. Okay. So my attempt through the book is to show how we became India, that is Bharat. Okay. In the hope that we will ultimately become Bharat and not India. Okay. So the book is, let's say, a trigger for that particular conversation. I completely endorse and accept the spirit of the question, but the book is trying to address the reasons for where we are in the hope that we can change the way we think.
Thank you, sir. Thanks a lot. Sir, you spoke about the diverse cultures that India has, or rather, I should say, the diverse approaches for a unified culture.
Right.
Sir, do you think that there is a misunderstanding or there is a difference when we understand unity in diversity as a concept or diversity in unity as a concept? Which is more suitable to India?
So this is one aspect that I've again addressed in the book, and I've called it, let's say, a triple matrix, wherein Bharat, as we know, is the product of a confluence of nature, faith, and patriotism. Okay. So our historians of the 20th century or the early 20th century, when they were writing treatises on the nature of Bharat, and when they were asking themselves this question whether Bharat is a nation or a civilization, they specifically said the nature of Bharat's society is that of a civilization, because the two important criteria for a society to be given the status of a civilization are diversity and scale, both. Okay, so Bharat satisfies both those aspects. Now the next question then is, if it's a civilization, it has to be connected by something common in order for it to be one civilization. Otherwise, why does it need to be treated as one society? These are then diverse societies which have got nothing to do with each other, right? So there must be something that ties them together. So as opposed to looking at whether unity competes with diversity and diversity competes with unity, Sri Radhakumar Mukherjee addressed this question beautifully by calling the nature of this civilization a federal civilization, which means he thinks of multiple identities as tributaries of a common identity. Okay, and every tributary obviously nourishes each region, and therefore the region is dependent on the tributary, but the tributary itself is dependent on the source. Okay, therefore, as much as we should celebrate our diversity, if the diversity comes at the expense of unity, I dare say and I fear that our diverse individual identities will also die. Because ultimately, it has been strengthened, it has been nurtured by that main source, by that central river, that perennial source. So therefore, according to me, it is unity in diversity, which I think is important, not diversity in unity. Because when you try to invert it and call it diversity in unity, then the focus is on individual identities at the expense of the larger fabric. Okay, from a civilizational perspective, from a religious perspective, as well as from a geopolitical perspective, which is to say, I don't think any of our individual identities can survive on our own if we do not form part of Bharat. Okay, I don't think our neighborhood will allow us to survive on our own if we are not part of Bharat. All of us stand a chance of surviving and retaining our individual identities so long as we are a part of the larger Bharatiya identity. Okay, so the whole is incomplete without the parts, and the parts can certainly not survive without the whole. That is the position.
Thank you, sir. That's, again, I must say, another food for my thought. Sir, there is a question that has come up. What are your views? Yes, sir. Please.
Kindly avoid addressing me as sir. I think you should call me either Sai or Saiji.
Sure, sure. What are your views on uniform civil code? Is a question from one of our listeners.
So at least on 2 or 3 occasions, I have managed to present this view, and I understand why people want to ask me this particular question. I don't have a view on uniform civil code still. I am agnostic. If somebody pushes me to take a position, asks, do you support it or not? My question will be, show me what I'm supporting and then I'll respond. Because I don't have a document in front of me. I don't know what is the impact of the Uniform Civil Code going to be on dharmic traditions. Okay. I am not concerned about what it does to the traditions of religious minorities. As a practicing Hindu, my first concern is what is it going to do with respect to my traditions and my society first. Okay. So unless and until that question is answered, I am not in a position to answer in a yes or a no. But as a matter of principle, why would I agree to anything without seeing what it is? Okay. If someone were to ask me, will you sign the contract or not? Can I ever sign a contract without seeing what the contract says? It's as good as asking me to affix my signature on a blank piece of paper without telling me what is it going to be filled with, right? And secondly, having had some knowledge of how Hindu traditions have been affected by the Nehruvian dispensation and how the Hindu code was rammed in without the consent of the Hindu society in the 1950s, I have no reason to trust the Indian state. And regardless of whichever government may be in power, I will always say, show me the document, let me see what it says in black and white, and then I will support it. Because some might say, well, you supported the dilution of Article 370. You also supported the enactment of the CAA. Why can't you support the UCC? Well, the answer to that is dilution of Article 370 is a one-point agenda. You want it to be diluted, you know what needs to be done and why it should be done. CAA, you're very clear as to why it needs to be done, because you're protecting minorities, especially dharmic minorities who are living in Islamic republics. So as far as I'm concerned, it's a simpler question to answer. But as far as UCC is concerned, the scale is so vast because it is going to cover a whole array of, let's say, a whole range of personal laws. So it's not a one-point agenda. Now, I have to ask this question. If a certain goal can be achieved by abolishing polygamy within certain communities and by giving women equal rights as far as property is concerned in those communities, why should I then get on board the UCC when it can be done in other ways? If UCC is being pushed as an objective primarily to curb the anti-dated practices in certain communities, I would expect the Indian government to have the guts to actually tell it to those communities. Because assume for a moment you wanted to abolish something in the Hindu society, would you ask the Muslims and Christians to compromise on their practices to ask the Hindu community to sacrifice? You wouldn't do that, right? Because then you'll come with only a single agenda, which is you will ask the Hindus to give up that practice. Now, if you want the Muslims and Christians of this country to give up certain anti-dated practices, which perhaps don't have a place in a civilized dharmic society, why should the Hindus also compromise? After all, we don't suffer from the same problems, right? We don't have the same issues. So Uniform Civil Code, and I've said this in a couple of places, so pardon me for saying this, is a loser's bargaining position. Okay, someone who is effectively saying, I have anyway lost my rights, please ensure that others also lose their rights. Instead of saying, give me back my rights and ensure that they don't practice something that has no place or no business in a dharmic society. So according to me, anybody who signs up and who says, yes, I support the Uniform Civil Code, I will ask, can you please show me the document? If not, I have serious doubts with respect to the intelligence of a person and the wisdom of a person who is signing up to something without knowing what he's signing up for. I would never trust the person with common sense.
Agreed. I particularly like the word loser's bargaining position. I must say that. Sir, I have another question here. Governance at all levels has corruption as its collateral byproduct. Many felt education will reduce corruption. However, though more educated bureaucrats are facing corruption charges, how do we expect transparent, clean, honest governance in the upcoming days? How to improve meritocracy in all fields such as judiciary, bureaucracy, legislature, and other public domains?
If I may say so, I will accuse this question of an inherent hypocrisy for a different reason. None of us seems to want to be educated for being honest people. So why do we expect this from others? I don't understand. Education today has merely become the means to earning livelihood at the level of the society. It's not as if members of the judiciary, members of the parliament, and members of, let's say, the legal fraternity or the police machinery are being airdropped by God himself or by the gods. It's not as if they're being sent here as avatar purushas, right? So if that is the case, if the society is giving birth to these geniuses, then the society is to be blamed. You please tell me that the rest of the society has put faith in education as a means of equipping oneself with ethical values and morality. But if it effectively has become merely the means to an end, which is a job or a profession, how can we expect education to change us? No, you can't. Simply because value-based education is no more the goal of any institution. These are, very few islands in the country continue to practice that. So as long as education is stripped of all its value, of all human values, and of all ethics and morality, and students are happy to copy from each other during the course of examinations, I don't think anybody has the right to comment on the rest of the society then. So if you truly believe that education must result in and must lead to better people, as long as you practice that yourself and you're an example of that particular belief, you have some authority to expect that from the rest of the society. But if that's not the case, and all of us want to be educated to simply use this country as a launchpad for greener pastures in California and New Jersey and New York and other places, what do we expect from others who are staying back in this country? At the very least, I should be grateful to the people who are staying back in this country to run it in some way, as opposed to using this as a launchpad to run away to other countries, right? Here, there are people who are willing to stay here and deal with our challenges and problems. If everybody leaves this country, then we might have as well given up this country to the invaders. What is the point of using this country and running away to other places? What did we fight for? It makes no sense to me. So while I think it's easy, I could have simply come and said, oh yes, we need judicial reforms. Oh yes, we need police reforms. Oh yes, of course, we need political reforms. What reforms will you talk about without societal reforms? Makes no sense. It is the society that is producing this. So if the society has gold, it will produce gold. But if the society is actually producing a metal which is not to be used for anything useful, then you will only continue to do that in every institution, in every arm of the state. So the problem is, we seem to think that the edifice of the state and the structure of the state is a completely different body from the society. It is a reflection of you. It is a product of you. So don't expect it to be any different from you.
I must say it's an eye-opener to all of us. Sir, one last question from our side. What is your message to the youth today?
The message to the youth today, I think, is to actually perhaps watch a couple of interviews of Neeraj Chopra, who's won the gold medal today. He comes from not an English educated elite of the society. He comes from that particular part of the society that is rooted to Bharatiyata, which doesn't necessarily take pride in speaking English, and is very, very clear that it wants to achieve not just for itself, but for the country. We must be grateful that there are still such people, because otherwise I don't see what is the incentive for anybody to join the armed forces or the police machinery or anywhere. For somebody in today's age of consumerism to still take pride in representing the country and to participate in its administration, because I can understand the prestige of being an IAS officer, but what about of being a subedar or let's say just a foot soldier in the army, right? Those people can perhaps become part of security agencies and get better salaries and not risk their lives so much. Surely it's not our case that they don't have anything else to do. They don't know anything else to do. That's why they're willing to die. That would be such an insensitive statement to make. The thing is, several sections of Bharatiya society and several groups take such pride in keeping up that martial tradition alive. And because they have done this for several generations, it is their way of life. For them, it's a way of honor. It's a code of conduct. That, I think, is what we must learn from, because there is so much still to be learned from these aspects of our own society, as opposed to looking elsewhere. Okay. So I think it's important to perhaps follow the lives of even Sindhu, for that matter, who seems to be so comfortable in her skin as far as her religious traditions are concerned, and is still comfortable beating the best in the world on international stage and representing Bharat. In the season of Olympics, I mean, at a time when all of us are witnessing such monumental changes in Bharat's performance at the Olympics, at the global stage, I don't think there is anybody else worth looking at other than these athletes, because they are not cricketers. Okay. And they do not come from sports which have the power of money backing them. They still do not have the facilities that we constantly keep talking about. They still have to travel several kilometers for them to reach their training facilities. Their families have to sell whatever little they have to train their children. And still they have not given up hope, especially at a level and at a competition where the chance of success is so minuscule. It's so heavily competitive. it's awe-inspiring according to me, and the rest of us who are better off should learn from them, and we should be grateful for what we have and thank the society that we are in the position where we are, and hope that we're able to contribute at least a tenth of what these people have done. If you do that in whatever profession or whatever field you choose, I think you would have done justice to the facilities and the blessings that, let's say, Providence has blessed you with and your family has blessed you with. Otherwise, I'm sorry to say it's a waste of time in life.
That's a valuable message indeed. Thank you, Shri Sai Deepak ji. We humbly thank you for your time and effort and this wonderful, insightful lecture that you have delivered to our youth today. Dhanyavad and namaskar to you, sir.
Thank you.
Tomorrow, we meet again for yet another inspiring talk, this time to understand Jammu and Kashmir, yesterday, today, and tomorrow by Captain Alok Bansal. So hope to see you all tomorrow again at 6 p.m. Thank you. Dhanyavad. Namaskar.